Hi, I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. First up, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni denies he's gone rogue amid a storm over his economic recovery plan, which has been slammed by the ANC's leftist allies. We unpack this controversial move by the Finance Minister with an expert panel. Then we turn our focus on the public broadcaster and ask the question, is there a deliberate attempt at collapsing the new SABC board as the state refuses to bail out the insolvent broadcaster? And as is custom, we take a look at what's made headlines in the weekend newspapers and why. The Fix starts now. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold the decision makers to account. We tell you why it matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. Now, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is meeting the ANC's top 6 officials tomorrow to formally discuss his proposed economic plan to address the country's economic crisis. This after a storm of protest from the governing party over his management of the release of the document and the proposals contained therein. Joining me to unpack Mboweni's move is ANC's head of policy, economic policy, that is Enoch Godongwana, Lumkile Mondi, who's an economist at Wits Business School, and Dr. Asgar Adelzadeh. He is the chief modeler at the Applied Development Research. And from our Cape Town studios, we are joined by COSATU's Tony Ehrenreich. Gentlemen, welcome to The Fix. Mr. Godongwana, let me start with you because you, of course, the NEC member of the African National Congress, the governing party, and of course you are having an NEC meeting tomorrow. Can you just confirm for us that Mr. Mboweni, the Finance Minister, is in fact meeting the ANC top 6 tomorrow to formally discuss the document that has created such a storm?
What I can confirm is that Mr. Mboweni and I will appear before the top 6 tomorrow. I'm not sure what the agenda is, but I know it's about the document.
Okay, so if it's about the document, why is the top 6 being informed post the public release of the document? It's very un-ANC if you look at the traditional way in which the ANC goes about releasing documents. You are very strict on internal democracy. You discuss matters internally first. Your allies have already slammed the process as Mr. Ngeni, or rather Mr. Mboweni going rogue. It's a bite that I will play in from the COSATU, President Losi. Why did Mr. Mboweni not go to the top 6 first before making the document public?
I think it's too more heavy and to say it's gone rogue. Everybody has got the document. I suspect is the timing of the release done. The release of the document itself is the timing of the release and the proper consultation on that timing than the release itself.
Okay, Mr.
I have the document.
Mr. Mondi, you have been saying that this sounds like, Gear Volume 2, and this talks to the substance of the issue rather than the process. You also warned that because of the way in which Mr. Mboweni released the document, that it will get opposition. Is that still your view?
That is my view. It's my view in the sense that a country that has invested heavily on infrastructure, seeing itself as a provincial stage, and failed dismally when employment has reached high proportions, around 9%, where in the implementation of the GEAR program, despite the fact that, we had not a highly inclusive growth program or growth outcome, we had a number of people being absorbed into the economy, were growing above 5%, and Treasury had the ability to present a social wage, which you all know now has benefited millions of Africans. But more importantly, we were able also to offer free antiretroviral drugs because of the space that was created by an approach which I think the minister is adopting with this document on the table.
Okay, before I go to Dr. Adelzadeh, I want to bring in Tony Ehrenreich from COSATU. Mr. Ehrenreich, the president of the COSATU Federation has expressed herself on the matter very clearly. Let's just quickly take a listen to her explanation, and then I want to ask you whether you think that she was too harsh in her condemnation about the process.
There are many issues that we can bring out of this document, but we're saying you can't sleep and wake up in the morning telling South Africans that I have this document. We are not in a farm. South Africa is not a farm. So there are processes of engagement. If we want to talk about substantive issues, we can't all be dealing with a document that is already a public document when a policy document has not gone through NETLEC. Cabinet itself, what is the view of other ministers in relation to this? What is the view of the ANC? So it also means that the ANC itself will have to deal with this document as a public document.
Now, Mr. Ehrenreich, that is the issue that COSATU has taken with process. But let's put process aside. We've got 10 million unemployed people. Our economy is not growing. Does it really matter that you didn't get the document before the time? It's out for public consideration. Why don't you just discuss the substance of the matter?
Well, I think COSATU is absolutely clear that we'll talk about anything that helps us to find a solution out of the crisis. But the one thing that we must acknowledge is that we have a crisis. Everybody in the society acknowledges that there's a severe economic crisis. We have unemployment of 35%. The 29% is not the expanded definition. The worst signs of policy failure in South Africa is the fact that the inequality levels today is worse than it was in 1994. So that must tell us there's a huge problem. Now, in the context of such a crisis, you need proper leadership and you need proper management of the crisis. You should at least have made sure that your alliance partners are aware of it, the institutions set up, as the President says, to find a social compact amongst the social players. That should have had a consideration of the document. So it's how you put it into the public arena and how you engage on that, bringing us to that point. You can't run the risk of now having us disagree on fundamental points before we even getting into the discussion. But even that would not have been the biggest problem. The reality in South Africa is that we have 25 years of the Treasury that's ignored the concept of social dialogue, that's ignored the fact that we are unhappy about the model of economic and social development in South Africa, and that we need to make sure that that's responded to differently. Treasury's presided over that. The gear policy has been architectured by Treasury and they've been implementing it, and look where it's got us 25 years later. So okay, that institution on its own can't be trusted to take us out of the crisis we're in.
Okay, Mr. Ehrenreich, hold that thought. Dr. Adelzadeh, let me bring us back to the substance of the matter. And the reason why I'm skipping process with you is because you are an economic modeler yourself. You are from the Economic Policy Research Center. You were, in fact, commissioned by the Department of Trade and Industry, still under Rob Davies, to do modeling for South Africa and looking at the growth crisis. You were saying to me earlier, the problem isn't just with the process of Mr. Mboweni's document. There's some empirical data that doesn't add up. What in the document is factually inaccurate, according to you?
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is very good questions, because if we look at the document proposes a series of macroeconomic measures. And then toward the end, it does an impact analysis. Use a model to do impact analysis to tell us where does these measures take us, what should we expect. And that's obviously a very important part of this, because it gives us an assessment of is it really deliver what it says it delivers, and by how much, and who benefits and loses as a result. Now, if you look at the document, it says that the measures together will add about 2.3% to average annual growth rate over the next 10 years. And then it provides the component of what's called the GDP from the expenditure side, how it adds up to that 2.3%. But when you go to the production side and sectors from the GDP from production side, it provides a set of projections for sectors of the economy as a result of these measures. These are all sectoral measures, so very important sectoral projection. And then when you look at what is the growth underlying those sectors, it's 5%, twice the 2.3%. So there is a major mistake in the calculation, or they exaggerate it. The sectoral impact are highly exaggerated, more than 100% exaggerated.
Okay, now let's look at the document that you've prepared for the Department of Trade and Industry. We'll come later to why it has gathered dust, because it was commissioned before Mr. Mboweni actually became the Minister of Finance. Up on the screen, we will see, your version of what the economy needs in South Africa. And of course, take us through particularly the differences that you've just pointed out in terms of why the Treasury comes to different figures than you do when it comes to sectoral growth and projections of that growth.
Okay. Well, this document that the Minister has put out has been around for a while. So we received this about a year ago. So the document that you have from ADRS we use for assessment, we actually quantified the impact of what is right now is being discussed. We already have gone through that. And what we found is that it is the impacts are much less than what the Treasury is proposing. And as a result of that, we took all the measures as they have and used a similar approach, but different models that we have. And then at the end of that says, well, what else needs to be done? Because DTI had commissioned us to look at, well, how can we get to the NDP objectives,
right,
which is different. This document, the Treasury document, doesn't define its purpose to be achieving NDP targets. Our mandate was to look at the NDP targets achieving that. So then we said, what else do we need to do? These are micro measures. Then we looked at the trade and industry measures to add to it. We found that that's also add some, but need more. Look at macroeconomic policy, because macroeconomic policy touches many different things, from infrastructure to wages to social security to a whole range of from expenditure side, from the investment side. We took that, and still we found that it contributes. There's no silver bullet in South Africa. I think that's one major finding, that we can look at if we look at only macroeconomic policy reform, which is it's not going to work, and the same thing with other. It's a combination of things that need to be done, and that's what we have shown in that report.
Mr. Godongwana, you have, and I've just seen your hand up, you have spent the better part of your life navigating this debate, right? Yeah. Both in terms of its substance and in terms of its process. And you've always made the point that the ANC is an organization that entertains all ideas. But at some point, the ideas need to relate into something concrete that both business, labor, and ordinary South African citizens can make sense of and say, this is our common ground. With the release of the document in the way that it was done, coupled with the shortcomings that Dr. Adelzadeh pointed out, do we get to that common ground with this document?
Let me just say, first and foremost, is that we are all agreed that there's a crisis. And that crisis needs to build confidence both in South Africa and in also the fact that we're likely to get to rating agencies coming our way, and the fact that the minister is going to have a medium-term budget policy statement soon in October. So we need what is called an economic story. To the extent that this document does that, it's quite a crucial and a timely intervention that we should accept as a start, and then go on and say, what the document, what the minister has then said, he said, okay, to develop, this is our view of an economic story. But before we can conclude, can South Africans tell us what are your views on the document? And this debate is quite crucial in that regard. And I think there's no, in debating this thing, we've got to make sure that we don't throw the
baby out with the
bathwater. So there's critical need and an urgency for an economic story. Okay. And the document is make an intervention in that direction, and all of us have got to find a way of plugging the holes.
Mr. Godongwana, I couldn't agree with you more. We do need an economic narrative.
Yeah.
But we also know South Africa's history.
Yeah.
There's a way in which we talk past each other. There's also a way in which people feel left out.
Yeah.
We are a kind of country where people need to buy into things. So process is almost as important as...
Let me just say, my own view, which I've communicated to the minister, is that the manner in which it was being released undermines the very objective. Because, as you can see from Tony, there's already an attack because there's a mistrust of the source, let alone the content. And then that can divert our attention away from discussing the substantive issue in this regard. So process is quite critical.
Absolutely. Now, yesterday, your ETC actually met. Yeah. And I know quite a few cabinet members that have to do with the economy, that's not traveling with the president, attended that ETC. Did Mr. Mboweni attend that ETC meeting?
Yeah, that ETC was a special ETC. Its main purpose was to deal with the integrated resource plan and related energy issues, including the petroleum bill and so on. This particular matter is the subject of a discussion of the ETC on the 20th, which we then make recommendation to the National Executive in end of the month.
Okay. Lumkile, before you come in, let's just hear the South African Communist Party on the matter, both in terms of process and substance. And then I want to talk to you specifically about whether the content of this document actually takes us to an alternative narrative that people can actually buy into.
We can't support the document. We don't know its source. In fact, it draws some interventions from existing framework of the NDP, which is a document that we know, which is a document that we've engaged with and differed with some of its economic aspects. So it's not necessarily a document that raises new things altogether. There are new areas. But some of the older areas, for instance, the framework is what concerns us, and neoliberal posturing of the framework of the document, which we think that everybody knows.
Now, of course, what Mr. Mapaila is saying is not new. This has always been the party's position. But here's the question I want to ask you. I spoke to a couple of ministers over the weekend trying to ascertain just, why this is causing so much havoc. And one person said to me, quite frankly, the party doesn't know what it wants. It doesn't really have an economic policy. The main criticisms of Mr. Mapahila is saying is that the source they don't know, and of course also the content is outside the ANC's own policy documents around a number of issues. This morning we have the Telkom boss saying that what is contained in Mr. Mboweni's document insofar as ICT and communications is concerned is inconsistent with the African National Congress. So does Mr. Mapahila have a point?
Mr. Mpaila doesn't have a point as far as the source is concerned. We know it's a Treasury document, so it's sourced from Treasury. And we all know that that document, as Asgar said earlier, is a bit dated. We saw that document last year. So a lot of things have moved, such as the ICT policy that the CEO of Telkom talks to. In this discussion, there's a lot of disingenuity because a lot of the people that have commented are being ahistorical. We mustn't forget that there was a break of a program in 2007. And in 2009, a developmental state led by Zuma with the support of the left, particularly COSATU and SACP, put a communist minister into the treasury. And they changed the direction of our economy with the new growth path and IPEP 1 and 2. So really, for people to say that the treasury in the past 25 years has been consistent, it's not true at all, because it is the very same treasury which was dominated by the left, which led to overspending, with projections of growth being very, very high. And we're sitting back when Zuma took the state, formed a shadow state and acted outside the constitution and hollowed out a number of institutions, including the treasury. So really, in this debate, let's be genuine. Let's understand that we're talking about an institution that has also been weakened. We're talking about the economy that's very, very weak. That we're better off as South Africans by agreeing with this document, some of it, particularly the issue around freeing up the state involvement, because we know that the state is not capable at all.
Okay, Mr. Ehrenreich, let me bring you in here. Mr. Mondi said you had control of the treasury. It led to overspending. You're being disingenuous about the source. We all know the source is Mr. Mboweni. In fact, in the newspaper, in the Business Day, Mr. Mboweni says he consistently tried to get hold of Mr. Bheki and Charlie via telephone, and his calls were simply not returned. Now, you know, are you playing hard to get because you don't like what is in the document?
Well, I think we've got to look at the question of leadership in all of the points you're raising. There's no doubt that there was a disaster during the Zuma leadership, but what we've got to do now is provide effective and efficient leadership that takes us out of the crisis. And the way this thing has been managed just shows that there's no leadership in Treasury and that government is allowing Treasury to go rogue, so that has to be addressed. But on the substance of it, let us make 2 points. There's a number of elements in the document that we support. ECD, public transport development, all of the social areas that it talks to, the wish list that it sets up, we could support that. But how we get there is the problem. You can't get to addressing the challenges in society by further impoverishing communities. So the attack on the national minimum wage, the attack on bargaining council wages, the exemptions for that, that's already catered for, all of those things, in our view, seems to be incoherent, and they're not going to take us anywhere closer to addressing the problems. The problems has to be the key challenges that face our people, which is unemployment, poverty, and inequalities, and that's what we've got to focus on. Of course, we can't be mindful to the international arena, to the rating agencies, and our need to attract investments, but we've got to manage that in a way that's coherent with the requirements of our country, and the way that this document fleshes that out does not achieve those objectives. So what we need is that this document must be recalled. We can talk to anything that's put on the table, but what we expect is a government that's coherent, that comes with one position to the engagement, and that position is in line with what the manifesto says and the promises we made to our people.
Okay,
there can't be a disconnect between what people vote for in elections and what officials try to do.
Okay, COSATU has made that point. Mr. Godongwana, I see your hand up again here.
Yeah, can I
let's first talk. Let me first ask you the question, then you can answer. Firstly, is what Tony is saying, that they agree with a lot of the matters, but there isn't a common growth story being told across government departments. We've already seen, for example, Telkom saying on communication there's a disjunct between what the ANC is saying and what is in this document. How are you going to tomorrow in that top 6 meeting with Mr. Mboweni and the leadership of the country, including the President, argue that government departments dealing with the economy don't work in silos?
I suspect tomorrow are likely to emerge not with a substantive discussion, but with a process which may include a proper coordination by the relevant ministries. For instance, within our team in the ETC, these ministers which we put together included communication. So that would have made sense. But let me just say, if you listen to this discussion, the problem has been the lack of consultation on the release. But on the substantive issues, there are a lot of areas of agreement. My point is that there's a dire need for an economic story. We will do the consultation. Let's agree, go beyond this mistake. We're more than happy. We're going to. I've spoken to Soli. I've spoken to the president of COSATU that we need to move with speed in trying to pull our action together and do the necessary, but focus on the substantive issues more.
Okay, I want to come to Professor Adelzadeh, but before I do that, Mr. Godongwana, one of the things that many people want to know is, did the President know of the contents of this document, and does he support Mr. Mboweni? Can you quickly answer that question?
I can't talk about whether he supports him or not, but what I do know is that he knows about the content of the document. A lot of leadership in the ANC know about the contents of this document.
Okay. Dr. Adelzadeh.
Well, I want to bring the discussions on the substance
Yes.
as well. Yes. Because is it really this document, is it really the story that South Africa
requires?
needs to tell?
Yes.
And I would say no, not at all. It falls short on growth, it falls short on employment. And then look at this from another angle. Treasury, this is not the only thing Treasury is putting forward. It's also putting austerity program of 326 billion cuts over the next 3 years. So it's a combination of the two. So these measures will create very small increase in the economic growth. We estimated about 0.3% add to average growth. When you add the austerity, it actually takes all of that away. It's not a growth story. It's not an inclusive growth story at all. On employment side, it's very vague. It either says that it creates 1 million jobs over 10 years, which if that's the case, that's nothing. It means the unemployment rate will not change much when you're looking at the growth of population. Yeah. Or it says that it generates 1 million jobs on average every year, which will be a huge exaggeration because with 2%, 2.3% growth, creating a million jobs, no economists agree to. So this needs to be sent back to be reworked to become consistent and to be credible. It's not credible as it stands, and it is not really creating the kind of jobs or growth that is really the country needs.
That is the substantial point that we need to talk about, Lumkile. We've got 30 seconds for you. Is this the document that takes us to a realistic growth path, or does Dr. Adelzadeh have a point about the fact that this document needs to be recalled and you actually need real instruments and drivers of growth with empirical data that is, scientifically proven?
I don't agree with Dr. Asgar because where we are today, we're in a far worse position. What this document gives us is a chance to stop the downward spiral. Let's stop the downward spiral, and by incentivizing the sector that's got money. That sector is private sector. Let's create that environment because as a state, we're highly leveraged. Therefore, this document is good. Let's get on with it. And then once we're growing, we can start debating these issues. At this juncture, there's no agreement whatsoever.
Okay, we are out of time. I see Dr. Adelzadeh wanting to raise his hands again. This debate is going nowhere fast. We are going to come back to it. Mr. Godongwana, I would really appreciate it if we could get a report back from that meeting between yourself, the finance minister, and the ANC's top 6 tomorrow to see what process you're going to follow as a governing party to get us to that common economic story.
I doubt if I'll be allowed to do so. That meeting is not mine. I've been summoned to appear before the...
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. Tony in Cape Town, thank you so much for participating in a debate that is far from over. Up ahead, we turn our attention to the cash-strapped South African Broadcasting Corporation and look at whether the government is deliberately trying to collapse the public broadcasters board. Do stay tuned.